When the will was read, everyone laughed. Thomas received nothing but a collapsing, rotting barn on a worthless plot of dirt, while his greedy cousins inherited millions. They called him the family fool. But what they didn't know was that beneath those shattered floorboards rested a secret that would rewrite history. The mahogany-paneled office of Arthur Harrison, attorney at law, smelled of lemon polish and impending betrayal. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle rain beat a relentless rhythm against the glass, setting a grim mood that perfectly matched the knot twisting in Thomas Wright's stomach. Thomas sat near the back of the room, his worn corduroy jacket damp at the shoulders. Across from him sat his cousin, Gregory Hayes, clad in a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost more than Thomas's truck. Beside Gregory was Jessica Lawson, Thomas's ex-fiancée. She had left Thomas 3 years ago, claiming she couldn't tether her life to a man whose only ambition was playing nursemaid to a crazy old man. Now her hand rested comfortably on Gregory's knee. They were all gathered for the final will and testament of Uncle Reginald Wright. Reginald had been an eccentric, reclusive man. He made a massive fortune in the 1970s and 80s through scrap metal, commercial real estate, and government surplus auctions. But in his later years, he had become deeply paranoid. He trusted no one, moved into a modest cabin, and let his sprawling empire be managed by faceless holding companies. When Reginald's health began to fail, Gregory was too busy summering in Ibiza to answer the phone. It was Thomas who dropped out of his structural engineering program at Penn State. It was Thomas who drove Reginald to his dialysis appointments, cooked his meals, and sat with him during his terrible, confused night terrors. Thomas hadn't done it for the money. He loved the old man. But as Arthur Harrison adjusted his reading glasses and broke the seal on the final envelope, Thomas couldn't deny a small flicker of hope that his sacrifice would be acknowledged. "To my nephew, Gregory Hayes," Harrison read, his voice dry and professional. "I leave the entirety of my liquid asset portfolios, the coastal estate in Malibu, and the controlling shares of Wright Logistics. Total estimated value, $42 million. Gregory let out a low whistle, leaning back in his leather chair with a smug, victorious grin. Jessica squeezed his arm, her eyes wide with newly minted adoration. Harrison cleared his throat, looking down at the parchment. "To my nephew, Thomas Wright." Thomas sat up straighter. "I leave the structure known as the North Field Barn, located off County Road 9 in Oak Haven, Oregon, along with the half-acre of unzoned dirt it sits upon. May he find what he is looking for." Silence stretched across the room, heavy and suffocating. Then Gregory laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a loud, echoing bark of pure amusement. "A barn?" Gregory wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "He left you the old rusted outhouse in Oak Haven, the one with the collapsed roof?" Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. "There must be a mistake, Mr. Harrison. Uncle Reginald and we were close. He told me he was going to take care of me." "I assure you, Thomas, this is the final, legally binding document," Harrison said, offering a look of genuine pity. Reginald was very specific. The Oak Haven property was entirely in his name, kept separate from the holding companies. It is yours, free and clear. "Well, don't spend it all in one place, Tommy," Gregory sneered, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "If you need a loan to buy a new tarp for the roof, let my assistant know. Come on, Jessica. We have champagne to open." Thomas watched them leave, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind them. The humiliation burned in his chest, hot and sharp. He had given up his 20s for Reginald. He had lost his career, his fiancée, and his savings, and his reward was a rotting pile of wood on a barren strip of land. 2 days later, Thomas made the drive down to Oakhaven. He had nothing left to lose. His bank account was practically overdrawn, and his landlord had already slipped a final eviction notice under his apartment door. Pulling his beat-up Ford F-150 off the county highway, his tires crunched onto a gravel path overgrown with aggressive blackberry brambles and tall, dead weeds. At the end of the path sat his grand inheritance. The Northfield barn was an absolute eyesore. It leaned precariously to the left, looking as though a strong gust of wind would flatten it completely. The corrugated iron roof was a patchwork of rust, and the wooden siding was grey, splintered, and rotting from decades of harsh Pacific Northwest winters. The smell of damp earth, mildew, and raccoon droppings hit him the moment he stepped out of the truck. "Unbelievable," Thomas muttered, kicking a rusted paint can into the tall grass. "You really lost your mind at the end, didn't you, Uncle Reg?" He walked up to the massive sliding front doors. They were chained shut with a heavy, industrial-grade padlock that looked surprisingly new compared to the rest of the structure. Thomas retrieved heavy bolt cutters from his truck bed. With a sharp snap, the chain gave way. He pushed the heavy doors open. They screamed in protest, sliding along rusted tracks. Sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. Inside, it was empty. No antique tractors, no hidden safes, no forgotten farm equipment. Just a dirt floor covered in broken glass, rotted hay, and debris from the collapsing roof. Overwhelmed by a sudden, violent wave of grief and anger, Thomas grabbed a nearby rusted iron pipe and swung it wildly at a wooden support beam. The wood splintered, sending a cloud of sawdust into his face. He dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He was broke. He was alone. He had been played for a fool. But as he opened his eyes, staring blankly at the support beam he had just struck, he noticed something. The bark and rotted wood had chipped away, revealing a dull metallic glint underneath. Frowning, Thomas stood up and brushed the remaining wood chips away with his thumb. It wasn't just a wooden beam. The wood was a hollow shell, bolted around a solid steel pillar, and bolted to the steel pillar was a small, tarnished brass plaque. Thomas spit on his sleeve and rubbed the grime off the plaque. Engraved into the metal were 6 words and a series of numbers. "The roots are stronger than the branches. 34128804." Thomas spent the next week living out of a cheap motel on the outskirts of Oakhaven, spending his last few $100s on canned food and cheap coffee. He couldn't stop thinking about the brass plaque. The roots are stronger than the branches. He returned to the barn every day, tearing into it with a manic obsession. If the support beams were secretly reinforced with solid steel, what else was Uncle Reginald hiding? Thomas hired a local day laborer, a quiet kid named Jackson Miller, to help him clear out the decades of accumulated trash and rotten hay. For 3 days, they hauled out garbage bags full of debris, but they found absolutely nothing. No secret compartments in the walls. No hidden lockboxes. Jackson looked at Thomas with the kind of pity usually reserved for madmen, took his day rate, and politely declined to come back. Thomas was left alone again. His eviction was finalized back in Seattle, meaning this rotting barn was officially his only property in the world. He decided his only option was to tear the structure down entirely, sell the vintage barn wood and the hidden steel pillars to architectural salvage companies, and try to scrape together enough cash to start his life over. On a humid Tuesday evening, the sky over Oakhaven turned a bruised, violent purple. A massive summer storm was rolling in off the coast. The local radio station issued severe thunderstorm warnings, advising everyone to stay indoors. Thomas, stubborn and fueled by a steady diet of frustration, kept working. He was using a crowbar to pry up the massive, thick oak floorboards in the center of the barn. The wind began to howl, shaking the entire structure. The rusted corrugated roof rattled like a snare drum. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the barn, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that vibrated in Thomas's teeth. Outside, a massive 70-foot dead oak tree groaned under the force of the gale-force winds. With a sickening splintering sound, the tree snapped at the base. Thomas heard the noise and looked up just in time to see the ceiling cave in. He dove backward, scrambling under the heavy workbench along the wall as tons of timber, rusted metal, and the massive trunk of the oak tree came crashing down through the roof. The impact was earth-shattering. The center of the barn was utterly decimated, throwing up a choking cloud of dust and pulverized wood. For 10 minutes, Thomas stayed huddled under the bench, listening to the rain pour through the massive hole in the roof, his heart hammering against his ribs. When the storm finally passed, leaving a quiet, steady drizzle in its wake, Thomas crawled out from his shelter. The barn was ruined. The giant oak tree lay across the center of the floor, having smashed right through the heavy oak floorboards he had been trying to pry up. "Perfect," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. "Just perfect." He walked over to inspect the damage, shining his heavy-duty mag light into the crater the tree had created. But as the beam of light swept over the shattered floorboards, Thomas froze. The floorboards hadn't just broken over dirt. They had shattered against solid, poured concrete. Thomas jumped down into the shallow crater, ignoring the rain soaking his clothes. He began frantically tossing aside jagged splinters of oak and pieces of the shattered tree trunk. Underneath the false wooden floor, running the entire length and width of the barn, was a heavily reinforced, military-grade concrete slab. His breathing grew shallow. He cleared more debris, working until his hands were blistered and bleeding. Right in the dead center of the concrete slab, previously hidden perfectly beneath the wood, was a massive, circular steel hatch. It looked like the pressure door of a deep-sea submarine. It was forged from thick, dark steel and secured by a large mechanical combination wheel in the center. Thomas's mind raced back to the brass plaque. 34128804. He knelt beside the hatch. The steel was cold and slick with condensation. He gripped the heavy industrial combination dial. It was stiff, protesting with a harsh metallic scrape, but as he applied pressure, it began to turn. 34 to the right, 12 to the left, 88 to the right, 4 to the left. He held his breath and grabbed the heavy locking lever. He pulled. With a deep, resonant clack that echoed through the empty barn, the internal deadbolts retracted. The hatch was incredibly heavy. Thomas had to hook a heavy-duty towing chain from his truck's winch to the handle of the door. He engaged the winch, the motor whining as the cable pulled taut. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive steel door lifted, groaning on heavy oiled hinges. A rush of perfectly dry, stale, and surprisingly cold air blasted upward into Thomas's face. It didn't smell like a musty basement. It smelled like a museum, a sterile scent of ozone, preserved rubber, and machine oil. He grabbed his flashlight and peered over the edge. A sturdy steel spiral staircase descended into absolute darkness. Thomas climbed down, his boots clanking against the metal grates. He descended 15 feet before his feet touched down on a smooth, epoxy-coated floor. He swept his flashlight around, searching the walls until he found a heavy industrial breaker box. He threw the main switch. Fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing loudly before humming to life in sequence, illuminating a subterranean space that defied belief. It wasn't just a bunker. It was a massive, climate-controlled vault, easily the size of a commercial airplane hangar, stretching far beyond the footprint of the barn above. The walls were lined with state-of-the-art dehumidifiers and industrial battery banks, drawing power from what looked like a sophisticated, off-grid geothermal setup. But it was the center of the room that made Thomas drop his flashlight. Resting under a custom-fitted, dust-proof silk cover was the unmistakable sweeping silhouette of a vehicle. Thomas walked toward it, as if in a trance. He grabbed the corner of the fabric and pulled it back. Gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, immaculate and untouched by time, sat a pristine silver 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL alloy gullwing. Thomas, a mechanical enthusiast, knew exactly what he was looking at. Only 29 of the aluminum-bodied versions were ever produced. It was the holy grail of classic cars. Standing there in the underground silence, Thomas was staring at a vehicle worth roughly $6 million alone. And that was only the center of the room. Lining the far wall were 8 massive, fireproof Mosler bank safes. Neatly stacked on heavy-duty shelving units were rows of sealed olive-drab ammunition crates, not bearing military markings, but stenciled with the logo of Reginald's old scrap empire. Thomas ran a trembling hand over the smooth, flawless fender of the Mercedes. A wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat. Gregory had the stock portfolios and the beach house. But Uncle Reginald, the paranoid genius, had buried his true legacy off the grid, waiting for the one person loyal enough and desperate enough to dig for it. Suddenly, the absolute silence of the underground vault was shattered. From the surface 30 feet above him, Thomas heard the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. A vehicle had just pulled up outside the ruined barn. And then he heard the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut, followed by footsteps approaching the crater. Thomas froze, his hand still resting on the cold aluminum fender of the priceless Mercedes. The heavy thud of footsteps above him echoed down the steel spiral staircase, cutting through the sterile hum of the vault's dehumidifiers. Panic flared in his chest, sharp and cold. Who could possibly be out here in the middle of a torrential post-storm drizzle? He sprinted silently across the epoxy floor toward the industrial breaker box. With a swift, decisive pull, he threw the main switch. The massive subterranean chamber plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Thomas backed away, pressing himself flat against the cold steel of one of the Mosler bank safes, slowing his breathing to a whisper. "Watch your step, it's completely caved in," a voice echoed from above. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He would recognize that arrogant, nasal drawl anywhere. It was his cousin, Gregory. "I'm telling you, Croft, the old man was crazy, but he wasn't stupid." Gregory's voice drifted down the shaft, amplified by the metal walls. "My lawyers found a discrepancy in the property taxes. Reginald was paying commercial industrial rates on a half-acre of dirt. There had to be an off-books asset cache." A second voice, rough and gravely, responded. "Well, Mr. Hayes, considering the size of this crater and this open blast door, it looks like your cousin already found it." Flashlight beams pierced the gloom, sweeping frantically down the steel staircase. "Tommy!" Gregory shouted, his voice a mix of fury and greed. "I know you're down there. Don't touch a single thing. As the primary executor of the estate, I have legal jurisdiction over any undisclosed assets." Thomas stayed silent. He watched from the shadows as two sets of legs began to descend the spiral stairs. The second man, whom Gregory had called Croft, was moving with cautious professionalism. Thomas recognized the name from Reginald's old business ramblings. Nathaniel Croft was a notorious independent asset liquidator out of Portland, a man who specialized in bypassing probate courts for wealthy, unscrupulous clients. Gregory had brought a shark. As soon as their boots hit the epoxy floor, Croft's heavy-duty tactical flashlight began sweeping the room. The beam caught the glint of the Mercedes' silver fender. "Good Lord," Croft breathed, stopping dead in his tracks. "Mr. Hayes, do you have any idea what that is?" "That's a lightweight alloy gullwing. If the matching numbers hold up, you're looking at over $6 million just sitting on 4 tires. Gregory let out a breathless, greedy laugh. "I knew it. I knew the old battet was hiding the real money. Tommy! Come out here, you pathetic loser. It's over." Thomas had heard enough. He reached out in the darkness, feeling along the wall until his fingers brushed the cold metal of the breaker switch. He slammed it upward. The fluorescent banks buzzed and snapped to life, flooding the vault with blinding white light. Gregory and Croft threw their hands over their eyes, cursing loudly. "Actually, Greg," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm, as he stepped out from behind the bank of safes. "It's not over. It's just beginning. And you are trespassing. Private property." Gregory blinked away the spots in his vision, adjusting the lapels of his expensive rain-spotted trench coat. He sneered, taking a step toward Thomas. "Don't play lawyer with me, Tommy. You own the barn, a barn which is currently smashed to splinters. Everything inside this underground facility is an undisclosed liquid asset, which makes it mine according to the will." "You clearly didn't pay attention in Arthur Harrison's office," Thomas replied, stepping squarely between Gregory and the Mercedes. "The will specifically left me the structure and the dirt it sits upon. It also said, free and clear. This vault is a permanent poured concrete fixture of the property. It's part of the dirt. Legally, you have no claim here. I have the best probate litigators in Seattle on retainer," Gregory spat, his face flushing red. "I will tie you up in court for the next 30 years. I will freeze this entire property until you starve to death in a cardboard box. Croft, start taking inventory. We're moving everything out of here by tomorrow morning." Croft hesitated, looking between the angry millionaire and the determined young man holding a heavy steel crowbar he had picked up from a nearby workbench. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Croft," Thomas warned, gripping the crowbar tighter. "Oh, please," Gregory mocked, pulling out his cell phone. "What are you going to do, Tommy? Hit us? You don't have the spine. I'm calling the local sheriff to report a theft in progress." "Call them," Thomas challenged, his heart pounding, but his voice remarkably steady. "Let's get law enforcement down here. Let's document exactly who broke into my secure facility. But before you dial, you might want to look at what's inside that glove box." Thomas hadn't actually looked inside the Mercedes yet, but he knew Reginald. Reginald loved theatricality. He loved puzzles. The plaque on the support beam had been the key to the vault. There had to be a master stroke hidden inside his prized possession. Gregory paused, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. He looked at Croft, giving him a sharp nod. Croft approached the gullwing cautiously. He opened the driver's side door. The iconic gullwing door, swept upward with a flawless, silent grace. Croft leaned into the pristine, red leather interior, popped the aluminum glove box, and retrieved a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. "Hand it here," Gregory ordered, snatching the envelope from Croft. He broke the seal and pulled out a stack of documents, topped with a handwritten letter on Reginald's personalized heavy stock stationery. As Gregory read the first few lines, the arrogant smirk melted off his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What?" Croft asked, sensing the sudden shift in the room. "What does it say?" Gregory couldn't speak. His hands began to tremble, the heavy parchment rattling in his grip. "Read it, Greg," Thomas commanded, taking a step forward. "Read it out loud." Gregory swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. It's a declaration of fixture." "Read the exact words," Thomas pushed, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Gregory cleared his throat, his eyes darting frantically across the page, as if looking for a loophole. "To whom it may concern, let it be known that all contents within the subterranean Oakhaven facility, including but not limited to the vehicles, bullion, and bearer bonds, are legally classified as permanent fixtures of the real estate, permanently bound to the title of the land. Any attempt to sever these assets from the property will trigger a full liquidation protocol, wherein all contents will be donated immediately to the Oregon Historical Society." Gregory stopped, breathing heavily. Reginald had engineered a legal bear trap. Even if Gregory tried to sue, the assets would be given to charity before they ever reached his pockets. The vault and everything in it was undeniably, bulletproof legally, Thomas's. "Keep reading," Thomas said, intuitively knowing there was more. Uncle Reginald wouldn't just secure Thomas's future, he would address Gregory's past behavior. Gregory's eyes skimmed the rest of the page, and suddenly a look of pure terror washed over him. He dropped the letter onto the hood of the Mercedes and backed away, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Thomas stepped forward, picking up the heavy stationery. He recognized his uncle's sharp, aggressive handwriting instantly. He read the final paragraph aloud for Croft to hear. "And to my nephew, Gregory, if you are reading this, it means your greed got the better of you, and you tried to steal from the only family member who actually cared for me. You were always too arrogant to read the fine print. You rejoiced when you inherited Right Logistics and my liquid portfolios. But what my holding companies didn't disclose, and what you failed to audit, is the $50 million in leveraged, toxic corporate debt I quietly transferred into those portfolios over the last 3 years. Right Logistics is functionally bankrupt, and as the new controlling shareholder, you are personally liable for the margin calls. I leave you with your vast empire of dust. Checkmate." Silence descended on the vault, heavier than the concrete above them. Gregory had the phone pressed to his ear, frantically yelling at his broker in Seattle, begging for a portfolio status update. The muffled voice on the other end of the line was enough to tell the whole story. Gregory dropped the phone. It shattered on the epoxy floor. He had inherited a sinking ship, a financial black hole that would consume his coastal estate, his Italian suits, and everything else he owned. "You set me up," Gregory whispered, looking at Thomas with wild, desperate eyes. "You and that crazy old man." "I didn't do anything," Thomas said softly, the anger suddenly bleeding out of him, replaced by a profound sense of peace. "You inherited exactly what you earned, Greg. And so did I. Now get off my property." Croft, ever the pragmatist, recognized a lost cause when he saw one. He tipped his hat to Thomas. "Congratulations on the find, Mr. Wright. If you ever need a legitimate broker, you have my card." Croft turned and walked up the spiral stairs without looking back. Gregory stood there for a long moment, completely broken. The swagger was gone. The wealth was gone. Jessica, once she found out he was tens of millions of dollars in debt, would undoubtedly be gone too. Without a word, he turned and trudged heavily up the stairs, disappearing into the rainy night. A week later, Thomas sat in the private mahogany-paneled office of Jonathan Pierce, a highly respected wealth management attorney in Portland, a man who had no ties to Arthur Harrison or Gregory Hayes. The Mosler safes had been meticulously cracked by a professional team. The contents were staggering. Beyond the $6 million gull wing, the safes contained pristine stacks of 1970s Krugerrands, anonymous bearer bonds, and original deeds to unencumbered commercial real estate across the Pacific Northwest. The total value of the Oakhaven vault exceeded $32 million. Thomas retained the services of Gooding and Company, the premier classic car auction house, to handle the sale of the Mercedes. At the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance later that year, the pristine, untouched alloy gull wing sparked a fierce bidding war between two European collectors, eventually dropping the hammer at a record-breaking $6.8 million. Thomas didn't buy a yacht or a mansion in Ibiza. He honored the man who had changed his life. He bought back Uncle Reginald's modest original cabin, restoring it perfectly. He finished his structural engineering degree, and with the backing of his newfound wealth, he launched Wright Foundations, an engineering firm dedicated to building sustainable, low-income housing across the state of Oregon. As for the Northfield barn, Thomas never tore down the rest of the ruined structure. He reinforced it, building a beautiful modern home directly over the original footprint, integrating the massive steel vault door right into the center of his living room floor. It was a daily reminder that true value is rarely found on the surface, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are buried beneath the things the world throws away. What started as a cruel joke became the ultimate triumph. Thomas didn't just inherit a fortune. He inherited his uncle's legacy of having the last laugh. If this incredible true story of hidden millions and sweet karma kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable real-life mysteries. See you in the next one.